There is a lot to catch up on and talk about with the current state of gaming. With Unity basically destroying their trust with game developers and publishers, the release of Baldur's Gate 3 and what other developers have said about it, to Dead Matter being another Kickstarter indie game disaster. The purpose of this video is to touch on these topics, discuss what went wrong, and what we can do to temper our own expectations, as well as discuss what the future of games and technology in general may be. I'm not going to discuss every single detail of each situation, as that's just going to take too long and drown out the points I like to make. Instead, let's discuss the scale and scope of modern day games, as well as what the next step is for gaming and keeping our standards high. First up, Unity. On September 12, 2023, Unity introduced a runtime fee based on game installs, and would be put into effect starting January 1st of 2024. Along with this, Unity would include some extra development tools at no extra cost. How generous! In short, Unity would have built-in detection methods for whenever a game was installed, and then expects payment from either developer or publisher for each installment. The announcement was poorly handled by Unity, and there were a lot more questions than answers, some of which we're still waiting on to this day, such as Unity being able to clearly identify legitimate installments from copies of a game, and not an installment of a cracked or pirated version. After a couple of short weeks, on September 22nd, this runtime fee policy was walked back, but not fully removed. This fee still does exist, but only for Unity Pro and Unity Enterprise subscription plans. The fee would then kick in if the release of a game reaches $1 million in gross revenue in a rolling 12-month period and 1 million initial engagements. After reaching those requirements, the poor sap who's still using Unity would then have to pay Unity a runtime fee based on either monthly initial engagements or 2.5% of the game's monthly gross revenue. And while these fees are currently only being enforced on the two larger subscription plans for the game engine, that still leaves the door open for Unity to gut the features from the smaller plans, Unity Personal and Unity Plus, to entice more developers to pay for Unity Pro or Enterprise. On October 9th, Unity CEO John Riccitiello steps down from his position, but is expected to stick around to assist Unity in a smooth transition towards a new CEO. John has been around the industry for a long time, but his public opinion on game design and monetization had never been favorable to gamers. In an infamous interview with John, he called out developers who had no interest in microtransactions, and when working back in EA, he brought up the concept of charging players real-world money to reload their in-game weapons. Though we can laugh and mock at his comments all we want, at the end of the day, he made a career in the industry. Regardless, John stepping down from Unity does not ensure that it's safe to use Unity for smaller budget teams. Unity as a company has shown their hand and are willing to create new policies to squeeze more money out of their users. And it's not so much a complaint that Unity is looking for other ways to gain more income, but it's more so how they did it this time around and how weak they communicated that change. It's never good news whenever products' prices increased, but it can unintentionally make headlines if the announcement is as cryptic and mishandled like it was here. I'm not going to tell you which game engine you should or shouldn't use, but if you do plan to go back to Unity, either consider learning another game engine just in case, and or wait for an official statement from Unity once they have found a new CEO. Hopefully it is one who has more favorable plans for the company and the game engine. On a completely unrelated note, remember when Baldur's Gate 3 first came out, and there were developers stating to not expect the same level of quality in other games?
Pepperidge Farm remembers.
Well, for all of us who want more games like Baldur's Gate 3, boy do I have a hot take for you. This level of polish isn't going to happen as often as we'd like. At least not for now. This is the part of the video where I want to dive into the scale and scope of modern day games and what the potential of future gaming could be. This is also part of the video where I kindly ask for you to like and subscribe if you're enjoying this discussion so far. The current goal is to hit 400 subscribers by the end of this year, and so far we are on pace to do just that. But hey, I won't complain if we get there a month sooner. Anyways, we're seeing people compare games like Baldur's Gate 3 to Starfield, Star Citizen, No Man's Sky, and Cyberpunk 2077. With the common complaint being that Starfield is the weaker of the bunch. However, that's if you're looking at Starfield as an exploration game and not an RPG storytelling game, which are really the only kind of games Bethesda makes. For instance, let's keep this in the sci-fi realm and look at the difference between Star Wars and Star Trek. Star Wars is a spectacle sci-fi franchise. Their fight scenes will be more action-packed and focused on a few specific characters. Star Trek, on the other hand, is more about the moral and political dilemmas of each alien species, and finding ways to overcome those challenges that don't result in genocide. And as a filthy casual of both franchises, I don't ever expect Star Trek to have the same kind of action or choreography that Star Wars offers. Going back to these games, I don't expect Bethesda, a company that hasn't been known for making a large galaxy-exploring game, to focus on exploration in their Starfield game. Instead, I expect them to continue making story-based RPG games that take place in different settings, and that one day, maybe one day, their NPCs could have a single ounce of expression on their face and also respects the laws of physics.
Maybe someday.
So is that it? Do we just expect small baby steps from multi-million-dollar companies? Well, for the most part, yeah. We've seen what happens when they swing for the fences and strike out. If I may request a moment of silence for every development team EA had single-handedly killed off. While we should expect more and raise our standards every year, we also need something to play in the meantime. Making a game like Cyberpunk 2077, Baldur's Gate 3, takes years to get to where they are today. Making anything that's even more detailed and immersive than that could take a literal decade of development time. Game publishers are a bit in a stressful spot. They need something they can sell every year or two, but at the same time, have a large project in the background that does live up to our expectations. We see companies like Rockstar be able to do this due to GTA Online and having it be riddled with DLC and microtransactions. And if you think GTA 6 is going to be any different,
guess again.
Let's also not get so desperate for new games to reach or break our current day standards by relying on Bethesda of all companies. They barely know how to make an online game as it is, and didn't even bother to have at least a 2-player co-op mode for Starfield. In my opinion, it's fine to have development teams like this, that can offer 30 plus hours of content in a semi-polished game, even if the game itself isn't breaking any boundaries. And this comes to the two things you have to ask yourself when it comes to buying a new game. Content versus innovation. Take for example, Portal 1 and 2. While I did enjoy playing these games for the first time earlier this year, there wasn't really much else to do once I beat in the game. I still have the co-op missions that I could do if I could find anyone for them, but besides that, I spent less than 3 hours on Portal 1 and just shy of 8 hours in Portal 2. Imagine spending $70 today to play a game that lasts that long. The online discussions would be furious. And while I do think you can still make a great game that's only 5 or 6 hours long, I don't think we could ever expect to pay full price for it, if that's all the game has to offer. This is also part of why Valve has yet to release the next part of Half-Life. They weren't satisfied with the limitations of their own source engine, and don't want to rush anything out that could be seen as just another expansion to the series. Which is also why we got the VR title, Half-Life Alyx, instead. And for reference, that game takes about 12 hours to complete the story mode, and about 19 hours to 100% the game. It's a good balance of innovation in the sense of it being a VR title, and having some unique controls that work really well from what I've seen, as well as having close to 20 hours of playtime if you wanted to find everything. Then we have larger games like Starfield and Cyberpunk 2077, which are still great and offers 30 hours of content, but they are plagued with some common bugs and issues that these open-world RPG games are known for. However, I don't see a reason to not buy these games. You just have to understand the history of these companies and set your expectations based on their previous work. Of course, for Cyberpunk 2077, that does fly out the window when the game first released. However, CD Projekt Red was in it for the long haul and they were able to make many fixes, and give the game a complete overhaul with 2 straight years of support and a new DLC. So regardless how a CD Projekt Red game is released or what you think about them, chances are high that they will find ways to fix their mistakes as best as they can. You may want to hold off on buying a new game from them when they first release, but there's a better chance that this company in particular will dedicate the time to making their games better. I'm not trying to tell you which game you should or should not buy or which companies to support. In general, we should be playing the games we want to play, and if we want to see more of it, the only way of doing so is by supporting those developers. So long as those development teams show that they're actively working on making the game better, and more so after launch, and that's really all we can hope for. That said, all these development teams I've mentioned so far have a record of doing just that. Sometimes they release games polished from the start, and other times they have to backtrack and make corrections. However, we can't just trust any development team out there. I've never tried to make a game on my own, however from people that I talk to, and the many videos I watched about game development breakdowns, making a game is very difficult. And when a new studio pops up that has zero track record, no real notable staff, and promises a massive game, you can consider me to be skeptical at best. Earlier this year, there was a game released into early access called Dead Matter, developed by Quantum Integrity Software. It is an open-world survival game with zombies running about, similar to the likes of DayZ. Dead Matter had started out as a mod for Crysis 2 back in 2012, and the development team began working on a standalone version in the Unreal Engine in late 2016. The team had received support through Kickstarter and even from a large company that seems to own 20% of everything, Tencent. However, the current state of the game is nothing short of abysmal.
Hold on. What is happening here?
Even though the game suffered from development hell, with new leadership and a rotation of developers, what they ended up with for an early access release does not look remotely close to what 7 years of development time should look like. Regardless what state Quantum Integrity claims the game to be in, I don't trust this team to bounce back and make a good product, at least not anytime soon. I do want to root for these smaller teams, as indie games can end up being the blueprint for the next trend in AAA video games, but not when these indie games are poorly built and have no real fun factor to them. Another instance of this is the game that we know as The Day Before. The game title may change by release since the development team Fantastic did not acquire the rights for the title in time, but it's set to release this year, and maybe it will. Every time we see a trailer of the game and how it plays out, it always looks like the entire design of the game's graphics and UI have changed. Even though we are very close to the supposed release of the game, we don't really know what to expect. It may end up being delayed again, like it was before, or it may release in a state similar to Dead Matter for all we know. And since this is a new development team that hasn't really released or worked on anything of this size, I'm willing to sit by and wait for whatever it is they release before giving them any money. To be clear, I'm not trying to gatekeep game development simply because these new teams haven't done anything before. Instead, it's because of the style of game they're trying to make. When looking at upcoming games made by a new development team that I do think have a better chance of sticking around, I think of the Finals, Alara Prime, and even X-Defiant. Though X-Defiant is being developed by an internal team at Ubisoft, arena shooters aren't really Ubisoft's forte. As for the other two titles, both of them are being led by X-Dice developers, which is a studio that almost exclusively works on FPS games. Also compare the scale of these games, with the Finals being the most ambitious with real-time map destruction. However, the overall map size and player count per server is far less than an open-world survival game. The scale and scope of these games are smaller and a lot more specific, which makes for a more consistent experience, as well as a game that should be easier to support over time, instead of what Fantastic or Quantum Integrity are trying to do by swinging for the fences on their very first project. And lastly, let's just go over what I think the future of gaming may be. When it comes to game design, more so from first-party titles such as Uncharted or Halo, why don't they have vehicles that are powered by Gran Turismo or Forza or even Microsoft Flight Simulator? Of course, there are plenty of reasons as to why this doesn't happen right now. Most of these games are running on completely different game engines, and trying to transfer features and gameplay mechanics from one engine to another is not an easy task. Game engines tend to be designed for a specific purpose. In the case of EA's Frostbite engine, it works really well for large environments and first-person games, but when we've seen it be used for racing games, it's not really ideal. It can be done, as the new Need for Speed Unbound is made using the Frostbite engine, and with some time and updates, this game engine could end up being far more optimized for both experiences. And when we have larger game engines that are not just designed for one experience but for multiple experiences, this does lead up to a certain buzzword we're going to hear more about in the coming years: the metaverse. While we are all a bit afraid and laughing at the idea of a metaverse, it's really the next step for gaming. Imagine an instance where every game you could play is available through a hub world, and since everything runs on the same game engine, all it has to do is load up the appropriate files, with fast loading times like we see in Spider-Man 2, but instead of going from one side of the map to another, it's going from one game to another. Of course, this is not anything that will happen relatively soon, but powerful do-it-all engines like Unreal 5 can make that more possible. I doubt Unreal 5 is currently built for it, but consider the games that are made with this engine. Fortnite, obviously, but also Final Fantasy VII Remake, Mortal Kombat, Rocket League, and a variety of other games. Having a metaverse where these games are going on in the background and can just hop into one or the other seamlessly, as well as look at other matches from a distance, like One Giant City, is very appealing to me. But of course, it all starts with actually having proper hardware to support this kind of system. We'll still need larger solid-state drives that are in the terabytes if not larger, hardware just has to be faster in general, etc, etc. But this is where I think gaming will eventually go. Being able to develop or create a program that works seamlessly between all of these games and projects seems like the next big step. Now, this would still be a very limited version of the metaverse, but in general, every company would have their own metaverse, because no company likes to share their properties with their competition. Sony will have its own instance, Xbox and Microsoft will have its own, Epic Games probably will have one, etc, etc. Though I don't think Unity would be able to handle this kind of experience. At least not before these other ones. We'll just have to use which one best suits us and hop from one to the other whenever we need to. Which probably will have some sort of subscription fee or some other catch to it. Hey, I never said the metaverse was going to be all good. There will always be something these companies are going to do to muddy the waters and stuff their offshore bank accounts. In any case, maybe I'm just crazy. Let me know what you guys think about all this, whether you enjoyed my ramblings of it or if it did not make any sense at all. Either way, if you made it this far, please consider liking the video and subscribing for more insanity like this. Until then, I'm Mr. Rain, and I'm gonna go back to staring at the void for a while.